Welcome to Legal Soundings, the podcast from Harbor, where leaders from across the legal ecosystem chart the course for the business of law. Whether you're navigating change inside a law firm, leading legal operations in-house, or building the next generation of legal technology, Legal Soundings is where insight meets action.
Hi, and welcome everyone to today's podcast. Today we're speaking with Greg Lambert and April Brousseau, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves briefly, and then we're going to jump right into the good stuff. Greg, I'll let you go first.
Sure. I'm Greg Lambert. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at Jackson Walker in Houston, Texas, although today I'm up in our Dallas office. And I am I have a blog called Three Geeks in a Law Blog and a podcast that I do with Marlene Gabauer called The Geek in Review.
Fantastic. And April?
Hi, I'm April Brousseau. I'm a director at Harbor in the Librarian Research Group. I have a background in knowledge and innovation and have been working in law libraries and law firms for longer than I care to admit.
I think we're going to jump right in by talking about your evolving careers. And I think this is something that is front and center today. It's really the topic of the podcast, but you each have led interesting career paths to get where you are today. And I know, Greg, you mentioned you have a new title, new role. So I think, Greg, if you could start, you don't need to mention how long ago we worked together with the, how you ended up today as the Chief Innovation Officer, I think would be great.
Sure. So my career started last century. But what was really kind of interesting was it was right as the internet was booming, the .com. And so I've always been, even though I'm a librarian by training, and that's been my job, I've always been like really engaged in the technology, whether that was, when Colleen, when you and I worked together in Oklahoma, when you were in Tulsa, and I was at the Oklahoma Supreme Court. And then as I moved down to Houston, I just kind of stayed engaged in the technology. When I went to King and Spalding, it was one of my, kind of things that I kind of weaseled my way into with knowledge management and IT, doing that. And then at Jackson Walker, have been heavily engaged in the technology here as well. And when the AI boom hit at the end of 2022, it was just kind of a natural cycle to roll into that. And there was a real, lack of, not lack of leadership, but I think just, it was so new that it was looking for, someone to take an innovative approach to it. And I've been lucky enough that my firm was very supportive of that. And then it moved me from the Chief Knowledge Services Officer over to Chief Innovation Officer last year, and to head up the AI strategy and implementation here at the firm. So that's mine in a couple-minute nutshell, hopefully.
I love that. And I think it's interesting. All three of us are, librarians technically, and, where we've ended up career wise, probably was something that I never, foresaw when I started. And I know, Greg, when we were in Oklahoma, what you were doing at the time was really revolutionary. And I applauded. I'm not sure it's something people should look up in terms of the Oklahoma Supreme Court network that, Greg created and launched at a time when print was prevalent and long before we were discussing getting rid of it. And April, your career also has taken many different paths. And I know when we talked yesterday about this, one of the words that came up was diversifying yourself to make yourself more valuable. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you've used diversification for yourself in terms of your career and your skills and what you've applied.
Yeah, I started out working in a law firm doing loose leaf filing when I was in school, and at the time I remember not having a clue what I wanted to do when I grow up, which is most days still. And I decided to go to law school, and when I was at law school, I was working in the library there to pay for law school, and thought actually I could really make myself more valuable to the market if I was going to it, not just with a law degree, but also with an information science degree. And over the course of my career, I have used both of those degrees and the skills learned to take on a bunch of different roles. I think for me, it is about the skills that one has, both from an education perspective, but also experience, and positioning that to leaders about why you're the right fit, even if you're not traditional. And I don't always get the roles that I want, but over time, I've been able to take some of the really important skills that information professionals bring to the table and use them as leverage to put myself into positions a bit like Greg. Like I first, after practice, went into knowledge, and then I pivoted into innovation and then product development. And then now I'm in consulting. So I think, yeah, it's about looking at the skills that you have, not the title that you have, and using that to get yourself to the next position.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And I think that tees off sort of what I was thinking about in preparing for the podcast. You know, we are at a bit of an inflection point. And Greg, you pointed out some of the others, and I know you've had posts many over the years. We've discussed this many times. You know, what is there something that makes this inflection point different? Or, you know, in terms of, I know we've talked about getting a seat at the table, grabbing the brass ring this time around, and being able to position ourselves within the firm as a leader in this area. And I think if both of you could speak to ways that you might advise an information professional, and then also law firm leaders, how they can take advantage of those skills that you mentioned, April, to the advantage of the firm. How can they leverage what they already have in-house in maybe new and different ways? Greg, do you want to start that?
Yeah, sure. So I think the old adage is if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu, is the way it's put. And I think what is probably different about this go round, the librarians have always done a great job at kind of ushering in new information eras, whether it was the internet age, if it was competitive intelligence or knowledge management. We've always been kind of pushing these new ways of looking at the information, which we live, or we work in information heavy industry. Yeah. And so we've always been very good at doing that. And the thing that has driven me crazy, and then I talked about and wrote about, is the need, I think, for some, whether it's the librarians themselves or the leadership, to kind of get that pendulum back to the center, to have the librarians kind of go back to their traditional work. Is just kind of, it drives me nuts yes. Because we do such great things, and then once it's up and running, we tend to have it, we either give it away or have it snatched out from underneath us. And it's something that I think, we need to be very, very careful about. And so now we've got another golden opportunity here. This, large language models. We're in information professionals that deal with language. This is such a boom for the industry. There's such ambition and so little ability for there to be leaders to actually take the rein and move it forward. So again, you're seeing librarians, knowledge workers grab, as you were saying, Colleen, grabbing that brass ring and then ushering us back into this. And so, it's my thoughts are, if we're going to be in these leadership positions, because we have worked so hard to usher these things in, let's think this time around about how we transfer that once we've got everything set up. And I really encourage my peers to maintain as much of this as you can, because this this is going to rely so much on information professionals to help keep things going in the right direction as the technology improves. So there's my soapbox for
No, I completely agree. And I think, April, what you said earlier about pushing yourself maybe and applying those skills in new and different ways. What are ways that you think our colleagues, our information professionals, and law firm leaders can take advantage of that, or should take advantage of that?
Yeah, I think as information professionals, we need to shift our mindset from being a business service, which is typically where we sit within a law firm, to really seeing ourselves as strategic partners. And that includes, like changing the language that we use when we communicate, speaking the language of leaders. It's about insight, not just information. We're not just content managers anymore. We are giving them actionable insight that helps them make their strategic decisions. I do think, it can be difficult to make that shift in your own mind, because, it's difficult to have confidence, but we should, because I think the skills that we bring to the table are really, really relevant, as Greg said. But in order to make them relevant to the senior leadership, we have to change the way we frame it. It's less about the library and it's more about the skills and the value that we're bringing.
Absolutely. And I think to that, I just follow up. Where do you think an information professional today can have the biggest strategic impact at the firm, April? What would you advise either, again, a leader to take advantage of that, or an information professional to position themselves? Where would one start?
Yeah, I would say it's about turning that information that we have access to, that we can find better than anyone, and turning it into intelligence that impacts the things that are most important to the firm, which tends to be around profitability. So I do think it's about taking the skills that we have and making them impact the things that actually mean something to the partners. But the other place where I see us adding significant underestimated value is around this enablement piece. I think, Greg talked about this a little bit, but it's about, we work with lawyers day in, day out. We understand their workflows, but we also understand the large language models. We can verify this information. Rather than just sort of training, we can actually play a really pivotal role in enabling firms to get the most out of advanced technology. At least in my view, I think that we can.
Yeah, I wanted to back that up a little bit as well. So when I was the president for the American Association for Law Libraries, my theme that year, and believe it or not, that's like almost 10 years ago, it was 2016, 2017, was from knowledge to action. And that's one of the things that we do is, yes, we have the knowledge, we have the information, the knowledge, the wisdom, but it's putting that into action in a way that is relevant for the folks that we work with. And so it's not just, kind of packaging it up and saying, here you go. It's packaging it up and then, working with the powers that be to put that into action and being part of that leadership that takes this idea and then moves it forward. It's that part right there that I think is going to really be the most value to us. And we do it all the time. It's just a matter of, we have to be very strategic in how we're doing it so that we're not just packaging it up and giving it away.
Right. I think that tees off one of the areas I was leaning towards as well, in terms of thinking about where we are with AI and some of these, the new tools that are out there, the way that the models are being changed. What do you think, Greg, firms are overestimating as far as what the technology can do? And where might they be underestimating the human expertise that's needed? We're talking a lot about the wisdom, the knowledge, what an information professional brings to the table, and that human expertise that, we value so greatly and the firm should value. Where are some of those blind spots that firms might have, both looking at the technology and what its capabilities are, and maybe what the capabilities aren't?
Yeah, I think where the overestimation is right now is, well, there's actually a couple. One, I think this one-to-one kind of replacement idea that the AI is going to replace attorneys, I think is a little bit misinformed on what it can do. But it's one of those things that if you're not careful and you let the innovation pass you by, yeah, and maybe you will get replaced. But I think that's less of a threat than most people think it is right now. The other thing that I think a lot of leaders at law firms are underestimating is that this is a young lawyer's foray. And quite frankly, I look at the usage, and it's much more senior lawyer partner based, because it's the people that have the knowledge, that understand the processes, that really understand the power that these tools give. And so to think it's a young person's game, I think is one, it's short selling the ability for your more senior lawyers to take advantage of this and have the backing to try out new things. And so, I mean, I think that's something that we're overestimating. What we're underestimating, I think, is just the power of the automation. That's the ability, and I think we're also underestimating the ability for these large language models and agents and processes to run, not just in a chat interface where you're communicating it back and forth, whether that's through text or through voice, but just how it's going to be seamlessly integrated into practically everything that we do. Yeah. And I think that we need to stop thinking of it as a chat bot and start thinking of it in its full functionality, and start integrating these things into more of our processes as we go.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think the way that it's changing the workflows completely from end to end, and where the human is involved, where the human's not involved. And I think Ed Walters last year at our Harbor Links conference talked about the different models where you combine the human and the AI is the most powerful. April, any thoughts on overestimating, underestimating the technology and also the human being in the mix?
Yeah, something that's sort of near and dear to my heart is information architecture. In one of my roles in my career, I was one for several years, and I think that there right now is a really large overestimation that AI will somehow magically organize all of our content. But AI amplifies what content and what foundations already exist. So everyone's heard it, garbage in, garbage out. To really get the most out of it, you do need to have really strong information architecture behind it. And I think that perhaps that's also what's kind of underestimated is, that expertise that is needed to design not just the architecture and the foundations underlying it, but also the governance around it, supervising the outputs and curating the content and verifying the information. I do think that the skills needed to do that is underestimated. And again, it's a really good place for the information professional to play a significant role.
I was just thinking that as you were talking about it. And one other point, I think, between what both of you are saying, and Greg, you mentioned this with the lawyers, one theme that I've heard that is, I think, of concern just across the board is training young lawyers, training new lawyers to develop that expertise, but not just the lawyers, also our up and coming information professionals I mean, we learned how to do research, how to find information in completely different ways. And that builds that foundation, that basis for which you're, able to build the expertise, whether it's in a particular practice area or just in ways of finding and locating. April, what are your thoughts around, the future of training and gaining that expertise and experience and skill?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we as information professionals have always been the ones that worked hand in glove with lawyers for every electronic tool and resource that ever came to be. We, on this podcast, all started when it was still print and moved to electronic. And so I think that this was brought up earlier in the podcast, like our role is still the same. I think that we can play the same role in training, but that the type of training is just going to be different. It is going to be more of this enablement as opposed to traditional training, which is helping them to, verify the accuracy of the outputs that's coming to them, but also spotting the right opportunities to use the different tools and the different models. And so I think that's going to really change the way that we approach training, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I'll further date myself by saying how excited we were when we got Shepherds on CD when I was in law school. Greg, I guess the same question, especially being in the innovation group at your firm, how are you all approaching training, not just young lawyers, but also, all of the support personnel that, need to understand how to use these tools?
Yeah, training is definitely the monster under the bed right now, because what would be the best way for me to train the attorneys and professional staff? It would be for me or someone it would be for me to clone myself, 800 times and do one-on-one training with the individuals to teach them the ins and outs as they're going along. But obviously that's not something that can be done. So we're relying heavily upon third parties to help us with training. But quite frankly, where I think we're going to land on the training is we have a tool that can help the user train themselves as they go along. And that's the tool they're actually using. And so what my big efforts are right now is to show everyone, as either I do in a classroom setting or online or even one-on-one when I get that opportunity, is to show them how to use the AI to help them AI. And the being able to use the tool as a tutor is going to be a huge advantage for those that can figure that out. And Marc Andreessen, I was listening to an interview that he was doing, and he was talking about nothing moves a student faster from the 50th percentile to the 99th percentile than individual tutoring. Wow. And he talked about the fact that we have the tool now that can do the individual tutoring. And so people like us need to figure out, how do we leverage the tool that we have to help train the attorneys and others as they go along.
Wow, that is, I love that concept of the individualized tutoring. And it's something, training, I think, has always been sort of the 4-letter word, right? We can't get people to come to training. We can't get people to invest in it. The time and also the money. Do you think that this has changed in terms of building or buying or putting time into, and a recognition that it's important, even now more than ever?
I totally agree with that. It's made me use some 4-letter words. But I think the training, but I think traditional training, we're going to have to throw it out the window.
Yeah.
Because the models change. I mean, every week there's something new. Just in this month, we've watched new models come out. We've watched new products get launched, and so that's that's going to speed up. That's not going to slow down. We used to wait until, AALL or ILTA to see a big product launch, and now it's monthly and or weekly. Yeah. So I think we need to scrape the model of how we've been training, all the way down to the foundation and start over and start thinking of ways that we can teach people to train themselves using the tools that they already have access to.
Yeah, I love that concept. April, I think probably to wrap things up, kind of teeing off of what Greg just said around the training and what we've been talking about, if you had to give some advice to an information professional, it doesn't matter really where in their career, honestly, because at this point we can, reinvent ourselves. To be more influential within their firm, or to present themselves as a leader, or to position themselves as a leader, what advice would you give them? Where could they start? I don't, maybe training is one area, or maybe there's others, as you mentioned, about insights and intelligence. What would you say to those folks?
I think the most important thing they can do is learn the business of law. I think a lot of information professionals don't necessarily have sort of the understanding of how the business of the practice works. They understand the practice of law, but I think to help themselves, if they better understood the business of law, it will help them tell their own value story in a much more effective way. Because those insights that we talked about and that intelligence, again, will be tied back directly to the thing that matters the most to the stakeholders. And that is the best way to be seen as, a strategic partner instead of a business service.
Greg, same question to you. What can folks do?
Yeah, I think right now there is a void in the leadership of looking at the AI tools in an overly strategic manner. And I think some of the easiest wins that are out there is to go through and talk with the partners in particular practice groups, find out where the choke points are, or where they're spending way too much time to get something done, or they have to write things off that they're working on, or they're pricing themselves out of the market for their traditional clients because as their rates go up, but clients' budgets may stay similar. We got to find different ways of selling and packaging the legal services. So to add on to April's business of law concept, but people are hungry for that information and guidance, and any advice that you can give them, I think, is welcome. But the best advice you can do is the advice that you give after sitting down and actually listening to what the problems are, and then taking action and advising on that. And then you're not seen as the person that is over the information, but rather the person that's guiding the firm in how to leverage the tools that they have.
And developing the solution, right? So you're not just
Correct.
You're not just documenting the problem, or you're actually coming back with a solution, which I think is amazing. And to your point, that can lead to you being put in charge of new things and being able to
just remember, no good deed goes unpunished. So
that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right.
Thanks for listening to Legal Soundings. Subscribe for future episodes. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. To learn more about Harbor's work across law firms and corporate legal departments, visit harborglobal.com.